in March, I'll be 91.
So I grew up in Clayton, Washington.
We lived in Spokane because my
And
dad and mother was during the Depression, and there was no jobs available in our area here.
My mom
So they moved to Spokane.
grew up on a farm outside of Clayton.
Yes, my mother taught me how to sew.
And so I grew up really with multi-generation.
And then she bought me a doll, and I made clothes for my doll. And it was a pedal, with your feet. There was no electricity then. Well, I think there's electricity, but we had a pump and the bottom part of the pump, and I learned to sew on that. And then when I get to high school, I did all 4 years of a home ec with her. And that was the days when I made a coat in 48, I think it was 48. Made many dresses, and I learned to
We
cook.
spent a lot of time with my grandmother because her husband passed away. My grandpa passed away at 49, and she didn't drive. So we did lots with her, and she was an avid sewer, and her mother was also an avid sewer, and her mother came from Germany at age 14 and left Germany by herself. She didn't come with family, so she came as a nanny with another family. So, and then as far as cooking, it was very much farm life. I didn't grow up on a farm, but my grandma had her farm. That was how she supported herself. And my great-grandma, too, was, they farmed and gardened, and my mom gardened, and so everything really revolved around.
My mother had a service station, and we had to cook fast and early, and then we had to clean up the kitchen and that sort of thing. But my mother taught me how to. She was a German lady. Her family was German. My dad was Yugoslavian, and so we used a lot of their recipes for old recipes.
My great grandmother was for
cucumbers,
so south of
and cream sauce.
And then
it would be cream.
When my grandma got married,
we used a lot of cream and
farm,
milk and cream. And mother made butter out of stuff. And then she fried it, and then she put gravy on the gravy. We had a lot of potatoes. She cooked different ways of potatoes, and so we always had a vegetable with it.
So this area is
some vegetable from the garden or whatever. We had a small garden, but most of the vegetables came from different people that stopped and they sell things on the streets, and we get it at the store. Because it was very
so
good.
My grandma had. So my grandma had 3 children, and everybody lived in the Clayton area. So my uncle was just a stone's throw across the highway, basically, and grandma was 5 miles away, and we did lots of stuff together as family,
turnips and we bought a cabbage because I think.
But so grandma had a garden that was probably at least an acre, and then as far as farms
in the garden things.
Most of the time they grew alfalfa. I think they rotated in oats too, but I always remember alfalfa. Ground, as far as you know what farming's like, the ground out where they lived was sub-irrigated, and so when the alfalfa crop was good and healthy and young, it was tall and thick. It was amazing. Like, it was perfect farmland. So not a big farm, but it was very productive for just a little one. And then, so as far as the garden, though, that was shared among all the family. So my mom and my uncle and grandma and my other uncle lived still with her when I was a kid.
Made horseradish. Had horseradish.
He was only 7 years older than me. So it was not uncommon. Like, well,
you lost a lot of. Your eyes were like onions. When
potatoes for the winter, and
breast
so they,
onions,
uncover them.
Water
and
up
us kids, we'd be picking them, putting them in spaghetti sacks and that kind of thing. That was their tradition. We did, and both my mom and my uncle, they had gardens as well, but Grandma always had more than enough to provide for everybody, and she'd give it away to the community if they want. People wanted it.
I bought a canner, and
so everybody
and I did a lot of stuff.
So fruits and
canning
vegetables
on the stove and water, and then I was married.
And my grandma actually had,
we moved to
on their
Valley.
farm, had an orchard. It wasn't part of the Arcadia orchard at Deer Park, but it was planted in that same time period. So multiple different kinds of apples, peach plums, that kind of stuff. My favorite apple was the Snows. So they wouldn't keep, but they were always ripe right about the time school would start, and they were just little bitty, super white inside and super, super sweet.
I was 27 years old when I married Ernie.
So everybody canned.
And we were the last couple at the St. Joseph Church in Valley.
Grandma had eggs, so it's chickens, so we all got our eggs from Grandma's farm. She milked cows, so she didn't have the big milking machine like what Delbert would have had in his barns. But she had the belt that went around the cows, and the milking machine would hang off of that belt. So she would pack that back and forth in the milk house, and she would all the family got milk from her, and then she would sell milk, sell eggs to provide for herself.
Oh, probably canning.
Raise beef cattle, that kind of thing. So even though she was the one that had the farm, we were all kind of part of that. And she would she hired somebody to harvest on shares. So they would get part of the share of the harvest.
Put the vegetables in and put it in the canner, and then you see the what you've done, and in our old house, I had everything lined up. What I mean, it's kind of like a pantry.
I don't remember my grandma ever hurrying.
Then as I
she would wake up about 4:30 to milk.
Pantries.
Gather eggs and whatnot, and we sometimes as kids we stayed overnight with her quite often, especially in the summer, and we'd drag along with her wherever, and it was a blessing as a kid because she would just, once we were old enough to be out of sight, then she would allow us just basically to have free run of the farm. So, hey, lunches at this time, be back, and so we would take off out in the trees.
But as a family, good for the family, and so did my canning.
My great-grandma crocheted.
And my pantry got down.
And sewed, made quilts, those kind of things.
I canned with
but she was
my mom,
known
your
for
grandma,
always repurposing
but I also
everything.
use the Ball canning book, which is like the Bible of canning.
Everything she did that, like the inside of a pillow, you could tell she had reused that from some other project, or she'd buy things secondhand and fix it up. And so it was kind of fascinating. It was kind of a joke in the family, but now as an adult, when I look back, and she was very creative in how she would repurpose things. She came from Germany at 14 alone. When she married her husband, he often would have to travel because it was Depression time, so he would have to go find work somewhere. And so he'd get his family settled somewhere, and he would go find work. Well, she figured, hey, I might as well too, so she'd hire out to be a caretaker or caregiver or something for someone. But so she did learn to have to live on a little bit, so reuse things. My grandma, then.
So they come out with a new one every year, but the one I have is probably like 20 years old. But it's been in production for I don't even know how many years. You can come across really old ones, and I'm sure your other grandma and Grandma Jackie probably has one. That's very old.
My great grandma lived to be 102. So I can remember actually going out to visit. And so we were married, but we didn't have kids yet. And got to go visit all the family for whatever reason. I was working on a cross-stitch project, and I just took it with me. I think that was kind of interesting, that sitting out there with all these generations. And I was working on that, and nobody thought anything of it.
I was in middle school, and so that was
just
where I learned the basics. And then from there, I just kind of taught myself.
I still have that. I think it was probably my first counter cross-stitch picture. I still have it. Very simple, but that's kind of a cool memory to think that I was sitting there working on that when all the family was just visiting together.
Probably the little quilts that go with the little bunk bed.
But every once in a while we get to see my grandmother, so my dad's mom, my biological dad's mom, and she crocheted and would often give us things like that. And at one time even made, when I worked at a drugstore in Deer Park, and we sold yarn in there, and she came in there and she said, I want you to pick a color and I'm going to make you a sweater. So it was, I was college age at that time. And it was like a magenta. That was like, magenta crayon. Isn't that everybody's favorite crayon?
I don't think that's my favorite.
Anyway, so yeah. But
I don't think I'm good enough for clothes sewing, because most of my clothes never really fit right, and so I didn't have the skills because I taught myself. I didn't learn the good skills of tailoring and all of that.
When we first got married,
I prefer more crafty sewing.
Some doilies, but some other things, and I thought they were doilies, and so I wrote her a thank you note, and she sent a note back, and she says, those are dishcloths, dear. Go ahead and use those to wash your dishes.
Yeah, see,
they were too pretty, I thought.
I used to cross stitch a lot. I like cross stitching. I like a lot of crafty projects that I can be creative, because I like to use my creativity, but I don't think I'm good enough as an artist to do that. So
my grandma, my mom's mom, she had made quilts over the years, and each of us got one of her more heirloom kind of quilts. So I got one that's pink.
That I'm trying to pare down, because I've tried so many of them, and I actually really like a lot of them. But I try a lot of different kinds of crafts, and I like many of them.
I have a set of dish towels that I actually just stuck away. I thought those were a treasure. Just, with her eyesight and everything.
I took wood shop in middle school, and I love woodworking, but I don't like it enough to just only do woodworking. I like other things too.
A lot of the quilts that my grandma made were very much for utilitarian. at one point in the Spokane Valley, there was a like clothing manufacturer. Excuse me. It might even been. Apologize for yawning. It might even been KL Manufacturing that used to be in Cholula. That they may have been out in the industrial park then as well. I don't know that for sure, but what they had was like that two-sided polyester quilted kind of like coat fabric. Well, Grandma figured out that they gave the scraps away for nothing. So we went out and got bags of this stuff, and so she made us quilts out of that. So I have a quilt that's purple and white, and she hated purple, but she knew I liked it, so she made a purple and white quilt for me. And it's made out of that, like, slick, like, coat material, like ski coat material kind of thing, that was quilted on both sides. And, yeah, so it came pre-quilted, basically. And so I guess one side, when she made the quilts out of it, she would back them with flannel. So they were toasty warm. It's very much a utilitarian quilt.
Applesauce, spiced apples, pears, peaches, green beans, stews, broths, jams and jellies.
Utilizing. So she learned, like, from
pickles.
Her mom, hey, if something's inexpensive or free, you figure out how to repurpose it.
I like so many different kinds of crafts, but textile
Which
crafts.
one of the closets in his office is mine for all my fabric and stuff. And what's really funny is I was thinking about my grandma because in her living room she had a couch, but we never sat on the couch because there were boxes and boxes of fabric.
I don't know. I think it's
almost after
the
the
colors
on that couch.
Colors of fabric.
So we never used it as a couch. It was storage for her in her little house. And I'm just sitting here looking at the closet.
It's color is what I really love, and the fact that but you can have colors in painting too. So I don't know. It's just the patterns of all the different kinds of fabrics and yarns. Just I don't know. I just want to do stuff with it, but there's so much to do. Or
I am not much different than my grandma. Mine just happens to be in closet because I have totes that are pretty much back to the ceiling with fabric. So.
Illinois, which is near Chicago. Baking is, I tried sewing. I didn't like that as much as baking. Baking I like better. Mainly she taught me how to make yeast bread.
Well, in my fabric, so when my grandma passed away, I got to go through her fabric, so I have pieces of it in my fabric, so every once in a while, even to this day, I'll incorporate something that was my grandma's, so that's pretty cool.
And then pumpkin, but the main thing with pie is the crust, but she showed me where to get the recipes. Melt in the mouth cookies, the ones you just made. But yeah, the melt in the mouth cookies, because they were easy and fast.
Just in the fact that you get to touch and feel what they, you're doing the same thing and passing on the same joy.
Back when I was young, my mother stayed home. Most of the women did. Yeah, also sugar cookies, you have to put them in the fridge. Cold, those kind you have to put in the fridge, and then those are called more like a molded cookie, where the melt in the mouth would just drop little blobs.
She had a shoebox with her project in it.
Well, I didn't like it if I made a mistake, and then I'd have to take it all apart. And of course, the clothes looked kind of dumb. I wasn't that great of a sewer, but I was working towards more than anything.
And really, that's like, even if I'm too tired,
get a job,
sometimes it's just, I just get it out and look at it or read about it or plan the next project or, there's just something like that. And, I can go through my fabric and tell you, like, oh, yeah, when I got this, or, some of it I bought, some of it I picked up for free here and there, and say, oh, yeah, this piece, this is what I thought I would like to do with that, and that's what I'd like to do with this, and, man, interesting how the fabric just speaks to each person.
Anytime I go to work, it's secretarial. Because periods in my life, I go back to work. and it was always secretarial, and I always did very well at it. Oh, I worked for the Navy in Illinois, Naval Ordnance Plant in Forest Park, Illinois. I worked there for about a year and a half. And then I went to Allied Van Lines, and I worked there for 5 years. And then I had your mother. Then I stayed home, but then I went back to work again.
And what one person is done with and passes on, then the next person picks up and goes, oh, hey, I want to do this with that.
My mother did I saw her do it, but you have to put them in and put them in at a certain temperature, and then boil them for so long. But a lot of the stuff, you could only do high acid foods when we were doing it, because you had to have a pressure canner, and back then those were real plentiful. It'd be like a pressure cooker, but for canning.
Interesting, because so many have like I made quilts for each of the kids when they were little, so, that's a joy to remember them dragging those around. And they were made to wear out, they were intended to be loved to death. And I made a quilt for Rob that, same thing, his is falling apart. I need to make him another quilt. But, I don't know, maybe one of them was, so when the kids were really little, I had clinical depression at one point, and one part of that healing process, so not like right in the middle of the depression, but part of the healing process of it was that I hand pieced a quilt and hand quilted it, and basically it was because you have to slow down to do that. It's not something you can just whip out in 2 seconds. It's one stitch at a time, and, with your own hands. And there's a rhythm to it, and there's a peacefulness to it. That was very therapeutic and very healthy for me. And to this day, I think I like to hand sew more than anything. It's not realistic to do that for everything, but there's a therapy in doing that.
And like if you want to can beans, you have to use that kind of thing, because beans are low acid. Low acid foods tend to get botulism. You can die from it. Oh, yeah, you're better off. That's why, like tomatoes and fruit, you could do those.
It's not and I can see it. It's actually what hangs in front of our electrical panel, the Kites electrical panel. So I can see it right now. And, it's not the perfect quilt. There are places where it's like, okay, my colors should have been better, like more contrast here, or, whatever. But there's a connection to that. It's different because it was meant to help me to be healthy. And some of my grandma's fabrics are in that. I didn't have a whole lot of stash at that point.
Oh, well, when you freeze them, what you have to do is you have to blanch them first. So what you do is you're going to do corn. So you get all the little corns off. So you're going to scrape them all off the ears. You don't want to put the cob in, because a lot of women didn't like the way the cob tasted. So a lot of them took the corns off the cob, and then you read in your cookbook, okay, how long do you blanch them for? So say maybe corn, I don't know what it is. I'm just going to give you an example. Maybe corn, you have to just boil them for 1 minute, and so you put them in boiling water, and you have a special pan to do this. It's like a pan within a pan, but the pan that's within has holes all in it. And so you dunk the vegetable into that, and then you cook it partially only for like a minute, and that's not an exact time, but you do it for like a minute, and then you dump them in cold water immediately. The colder, you can have ice floating in it, but you dump them in cold water, and then you freeze them in little bags, little portions of how much you would like per meal.
Yeah, interesting. When at quilt retreat, people will bring, there's always a give it, take it table kind of thing, and we all go through it. It's like, oh, okay, I can see the potential of that, and it might be, 6 inches, but yet it goes into a scrap quilt at some point, and there's a joy to that, like using that little bit, and yet it's part of a bigger piece. And yeah, I don't know. I love making that kind of stuff. There's a joy in that.